So let us start with regional anesthesia. All of the following statements are true regarding the procedure done with the following needle in the picture, except breath holding is not required for the procedure. The bevel of the needle faces upwards while inserting the needle. It is done in lateral recumbent position. And D choice, coagulopathy is not an absolute contraindication. So first of all, let us see which is the needle that has been given to us. So that's a 25 gauge. How do I know 25 gauge? Because of the color coding. The orange code tells me that it is a 25 gauge Quincke's spinal needle. So the examiner is asking us about spinal anesthesia. Before answering the question, let us have an overview of spinal and epidural anesthesia. They are together called as central neuralgial blocks. A word about anatomy. In the intrauterine life, the spinal cord accumulates almost the whole of the vertebral column. But as the child grows by infancy, due to the differential growth of the neural tissue and the vertebral column, the spinal cord ends at the lower border of L3 vertebra. However, this differential growth continues, and in adults, the spinal cord ends at lower border of L1. That means it is safe to do any procedure like spinal or a lumbar puncture or an epidural anesthesia beyond L2 in an adult. So this slide shows that this is the spinal cord and that's the CSF, and here in the CSF, that's the place where we put in a spinal needle to give spinal anesthesia and deposit the drug, right? We use 0.5% of sensory cane, heavy. It is heavy because we have added 8% of glucose to make it heavy, to 0.5% sensory cane, also called as bupivacaine heavy, right? So this image, I just want to show you that that's the spinal cord, that's the CSF or the subarachnoid space, and just outside the subarachnoid space is the epidural space where we put in epidural catheters, right? So they have time and again questioned you about the structures that are pierced from posteriorly to anteriorly while giving a spinal anesthesia or performing a lumbar puncture. So these are the structures that are pierced while giving a spinal anesthesia. From posterior to anteriorly are skin, subcutaneous fascia, right? Then the supraspinatus ligaments, right? Then the interspinous ligaments. Then the ligamentum flavum, that's a yellow thick ligament, and once you pierce this ligament, it gives you a feel. And beyond the ligamentum flavum is the epidural space, and that is where we are putting our epidural catheter. And when we pierce the dura, we go into the CSF spinal space. So the structures that are pierced from posterior to anterior are skin, subcutaneous fascia, supraspinous ligaments, interspinous ligaments, ligamentum flavum, epidural space, and then the dura mater. Obviously, when we are putting in the epidural catheter, we will not pierce the dura. Great. So this is the position in which we are putting the central neuralgial block, that is epidural or spinal. Sitting position, or it can be lateral position also, okay, maybe a right lateral or the left lateral depending on the convenience of the anesthetic. So that's your spinal needle. As I told you, this is 25 gauge Quincke's needle. and that's the introducer. This is Quincke's because the bevel of this needle is something like this. It is a dura cutting needle, right? Whereas the other needles, that is Potte and Whittaker, they are dura piercing needles, and their tip is like this. They are pencil point needles. They are implicated in postspinal headache. So it is said that these needles cause less of postspinal headache compared to the Quincke's needle, because Quincke needle is a dura cutting needle and this is a dura separating needle. Fine. So that's your epidural set. This is the epidural catheter. This is your Tooheys needle or the epidural needle. You can see here, this one also is a Tooheys needle. Now this is the needle which has markings on it. It has graduations. So while you are performing the epidural block, you can see how far you have gone in to ease the catheter insertion. Great, and that's the filter. So this is, I have already said, are the two positions in which we can perform the central neuraxial block. Now moving on to your question. All of the following statements are true regarding the procedure done with the following needle in picture except. So that's a Quincke's needle, spinal needle. Breath holding is not required for the procedure. You need not remember Quincke's or the names of the needle, but you must remember that it's a spinal needle. So breath holding is not required for the procedure. That's right. In fact, the anesthetic can hold his breath. I'm joking. The bevel of the needle face upwards while inserting the needle. So when the patient is in the lateral recumbent position, the bevel should face upwards so that the dural fibers are not getting cut. They are only getting separated. This is to decrease the chances of post-spinal headache. So that's also correct. Coagulopathy is not an absolute contraindication. So coagulopathy is a major contraindication to performance of central neuraxial block, because if the patient is on anticoagulants or has a congenitally or inherited coagulation defect, we perform central neuraxial block, especially spinal anesthesia. In such a patient, we can face a dreaded complication called as the spinal hematoma. Spinal hematoma can lead to paraparesis of the patient in the post-op, leading to paraparesis, right? Because the blood vessels in the spinal canal can get ruptured due to the introduction of the needle there, and the blood that is collected in the closed spinal space can lead to compression on the nerves, right, leading to paraparesis. So coagulopathy is an absolute contraindication in patients. So there are other 3 contraindications to the performance of central neuraxial block, the other 3 being patient refusal. So if your patient refuses a spinal block, patient says, I want general anesthesia, we can counsel that patient. But if we are not able to get across that patient, we must accept patient refusal and go ahead and not perform the central neuraxial block. So patient refusal is one. Second is, if the patient is allergic to the drug like Sensiricane that we are using for spinal anesthesia, if the patient is allergic to the drug, then it is a absolute contraindication. Third being coagulopathy, right? And fourth being local sepsis at the site of performance of the block. Okay, if there is sepsis, we can augment and cause meningitis to such a patient. So these are the 4 absolute contraindications of central neuraxial blocks. Moving on, anesthetic technique of choice for lower segment cesarean section in a lady with severe PIH or preeclampsia. Subarachnoid block. So spinal block or spinal anesthesia, the other name is subarachnoid block. Combined spinal and epidural block, epidural anesthesia or general anesthesia. So the answer to this question is subarachnoid block, that is spinal block. This is because earlier they had thought that in severe preeclampsia, general anesthesia is better. They used to recommend that. But extensive review of the literature tells us that if pregnant patient is given general anesthesia, because of lot of tissue edema, there are chances of difficult intubation and adverse outcome of anesthesia. So studies have told us that spinal anesthesia is a very safe and desirable option in patients with preeclampsia also. Moving on, which of the following statement is not true regarding post-spinal hypotension? Most common complication accompanied by tachycardia, can be treated with head low position. Crystalloids are not useful for prevention of hypotension. So that's a fairly simple question. Most common complication? Yes, it is a common complication of hypertension, is the most common complication of spinal anesthesia accompanied by tachycardia. So that's Mary's reflex. Whenever you have hypotension, you have compensatory reflex tachycardia. That's also true. It can be treated with head low position. Yes, head low position, because when you do head low position, this is the head, these are the legs, you increase the venous return to the heart and therefore treat the hypotension. Crystalloids are not useful in prevention of hypotension. That is not correct. In fact, there is a concept of co-loading or preloading of at least of crystalloid solution with the spinal anesthesia. So crystalloids are useful in preventing hypotension. Coming to what are the complications of spinal anesthesia. So intraoperatively hypotension, high spinal, nausea, vomiting and also bradycardia. Post-operatively it is urinary retention and post-dural puncture headache. So I would say hypotension is the most common intraoperative complication of subarachnoid block, right? And urinary retention is the most common post-operative complication. So these are the questions which you can be quizzed on. Urinary retention occurs because the bladder is supplied by S2, S3, S4, that is nervi agencies. These sacral nerves are supplying the bladder and they will definitely get blocked in a subarachnoid block. Therefore, urinary retention being the most common post-op complication in a patient whom we have given a central neuraxial block, especially spinal anesthesia, we put in a catheter till the time the patient's effects wears off. Fine. So, coming to PDPH, that is post-dural puncture headache. So, it is talked upon so commonly, but it is not that common, or it is at least not the most common complication. But you must know this topic thoroughly because all of these are exam questions. Post-dural headache or post-spinal headache, usually it's a low pressure headache and occurs because there is traction on the spinal nerves, right? It usually occurs when the patient begins to sit or starts to ambulate, right? So this is a characteristic headache which is occipital or maybe frontal in location. Also, this headache increases when the patient is sitting or moving, and it gets relieved immediately when the patient lies down. So if your patient gives this history, the exacerbating factors and relieving factors, that is, says I am relieved when I lie down, it should click the diagnosis of post-dural puncture headache. How do you prevent it? You prevent it by hydration, and that was your question. Crystalloids are not useful in preventing the headache, but yes, hydration can improve the post-dural puncture headache. What is the treatment? We must tell the patient to lie supine because it helps the patient. Give lots of oral or IV fluids, whatever may be the condition. Give oral caffeine to the patient, give NSAIDs, and even after doing this 3 to 4 days, the patient is not happy, not getting relieved, the definitive treatment is then giving autologous epidural blood patch. Moving on to the next question. A patient was getting 3 ml of morphine epidurally. One day the nurse accidentally gave 12 ml of morphine epidurally. All of the following are correct except retching and nausea will be symptoms. Patient will have intense itching, urinary retention. Give him oxygen by non-invasive ventilation. So, in the question, the examiner is saying the patient was getting morphine 3 milligrams by an epidural catheter, which is the usual dose of morphine epidurally. But accidentally she gave a large dose, which is 12 milligrams of morphine epidurally. Now this patient will have what is called as nausea, vomiting. Yes, because the opioids have CTZ center in the brain which can directly get stimulated because of the epidural morphine, right? So retching and vomiting will be the symptom. Patient will have intense itching. Yes, pruritus is a very common complaint of patients who get epidural or spinal opioids, right? It is the incidence, the literature reports that the incidence is as high as about 30 to 100%, right? And we don't know the cause. It is not because of the histamine release, right? Urinary retention. So as I have already mentioned, urinary retention will occur to a patient who has got any neuraxial block, right? It is not just because of the opioid drug, right? Because since the S2, S3, S4 are getting blocked, urinary retention will occur because of the local anesthetic effect and not because of the epidural. So morphine 12 milligrams is not going to make that difference here. So that is the answer, I guess. Let's look at the other option. Give him oxygen by non-invasive ventilation. Yes, a high dose of opioids can precipitate respiratory depression. So you must be on a lookout, watch out, observe this patient's respiratory rate. If it is less than 9, you can very well give him oxygen by a non-invasive ventilation. So your answer is urinary retention. Moving on. A female in the labor ward was administered opioid analgesic. Which of the following drug should be kept ready for emergency? Fentanyl, that's an opioid again. Naloxone, morphine and bupivacaine. So morphine and fentanyl are again opioids, right? So in the question, the examiner is asking an opioid antagonist, a drug which could reverse the action of the opioid, which is naloxone. So naloxone is a pure opioid antagonist, mainly acting on the mu receptors. But remember, this has a very short duration of action. Sometimes we need to give it with an infusion because of its duration of action. And bupivacaine, we know, is a local anesthetic, so that cannot be the choice. Moving on. So friends, that's your 2-minute break. Stay tuned.